Good afternoon, everybody. I understand we have a quorum on this day of Wednesday, January 18th. So I'll hereby call this meeting to order at 1:30. Would Vice Chair Mark Joseph like to lead us in Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you.
Allegiance to the flag, United States of America, stand.
Thank you, everybody. We do have a few new faces here today. So I want to welcome everybody to this meeting, especially those who are new to the NVTA board. Laura, a roll call, please.
Leon Garcia.
Here, and I'm not showing up on my video, so I don't know what technical issues there. Maybe you can help me solve it.
Wonderful, thank you. Mark Joseph.
Here.
Donald Williams is a confirmed absence, along with his counterpart, Kevin Eisenberg. Liz Alessio.
Present.
Scott Sedgley.
Yes.
Alfredo
Here.
Pedroza.
Here.
Ryan Gregory.
Here.
Eric Hall.
Here.
Anna Shuto. Hillary Tripp. And Eric Knight. We do have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Do we have any changes to the agenda? And if we don't, is there a motion and a second to adopt the agenda?
So move Garcia.
This is the NVTA-TA.
TA, tax agency, yes.
Yes, a tax
Second.
agency. Thank you. Roll call, please, Laura.
Leon Garcia.
Yes.
Mark Joseph.
Yes.
Liz Alessio.
Yes.
Scott Sedgley.
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza.
Yes.
Ryan Gregory.
Yes.
Eric Hall.
Yes.
Anna Shuto. Motion passes.
Excellent. This is the time for public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment on the tax authority? Not seeing any, Laura. Do we have anybody online?
We do not.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 6 is chairpersons and board members update. Any updates from the board members? Again, this is for the tax authority, tax agency. Okay, not seeing any. Moving on to item 7, this is the consent agenda items. Do any board members wish to pull any items from the consent agenda? I'm not seeing. Laura, do you see any?
I do not.
Thank you. Then can I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make that motion, Joseph.
Thank you.
Second, Pedroza.
Thank you. We have a motion by Joseph and a second by Pedroza. Can we have roll call, please?
Leon Garcia.
Yes.
Mark Joseph.
Yes.
Liz Alessio.
Yes.
Scott Sedgley.
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza.
Yes.
Ryan Gregory.
Yes.
Eric Hall.
Yes.
And Anna Shuto.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Excellent. Moving on to 8.1. This is an action item. Danielle Schmitz will present this item. When the report is finished, we'll ask board members for any questions, and we'll be asking for a motion in a second and then roll call. So Danielle, you can give us an update, a 5-year update on the project list for the County of Napa.
Good afternoon. Oh, yeah, come on. Good afternoon, Danielle Schmitz, Director of Capital Development and Planning, here to present item 8.1, approval of the revised Napa County 5-year measured T list for fiscal years 2022 to 2027. Every 2 years, the jurisdictions of Napa County submit a 5-year project list to NVTA, which identifies measured T expenditures for the period, the 5-year period. And this is a requirement of the Measure T ordinance. And jurisdictions can update their list as often as they like. They just have to go through a public hearing process with their governing board and then bring the 5-year list to the NVTA-TA committee for approval. The County Board of Supervisors approved their original list in early 2022, but at the end of last year, they made some revisions, and in November, they held a public hearing with a revised list that includes updates to 6 existing projects, as well as adding 7 new projects, which are listed in your board item in front of you. Staff has reviewed the amended projects and has deemed them all eligible, as well as the Independent Tax Oversight Committee was convened on December 7th, reviewed the projects, and also recommended approval to the NVTA board. The county expects to initiate a lot of these projects in 2023. So we are bringing them to the TA today for approval. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Danielle. Do we have any public comment or questions on this? I don't see anybody here, nobody online. Okay. Any board member questions?
Chair,
Yes.
I'm only seeing the county list. Is it because we're addressing this because the county changed their list and it has to be recognized by
Correct.
NVTA?
Yeah, so the other jurisdictions brought their list. We take them all in the beginning, or I think it's the beginning of the even years to the NVTA-TA board. So we did that last year, and the county has made some revisions. They have extra, or you have some extra revenues that are coming in, and so you're being able to leverage those revenues by being able to perform more projects. And so that's where the additional projects came in on the Measure T list.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Are there any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. Do we have a motion and a second to approve this item?
I'll make a motion to approve it. Joseph?
I'll second. Okay, we have a motion by Joseph and a second by Shuto. Roll call, please.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Liz Alessio,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Ryan Gregory,
Yes.
Eric Hall,
Yes.
Anna Shuto.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Excellent. Moving on to 8.2 on the agenda. This is an informational item only, so no action will be required. Danielle, you're going to be presenting this item also.
Yes.
And this is the Measure T biannual report for fiscal year 2020, 2021 and 2021, 2022. You can find this on pages 27 through 32.
Yeah, and just Danielle Schmitz again, item 8.2. In the handout for this meeting, there's a revised version. We did find a typo, and so this revised version is what will be going to the Napa Valley Register next week. So NVTA staff has compiled the Measure T biannual report for fiscal years 2020, 2021, and 2021, 2022. The report provides a financial overview and lists the projects in progress and completed during the 2-year period. The report is a requirement of Measure T ordinance, which states that the NVTA-TA shall publish a biannual report to the community in all local Napa County newspapers of general circulation, which the register is at for Napa County. During the 2-year period, Measure T generated over $45 million in revenue. This funding was used to rehabilitate approximately 10 miles of local streets and roads, 7,200 feet of sidewalk, and installation of 28 curb ramps. Funding distributed by jurisdiction for the 2 fiscal years is American Canyon received $3.4 million, Calistoga 1.2, City of Napa 18.2, Napa County 17.8 million, and St. Helena 2.6, and Yountville 1.2 million. And so just to remind everybody, we do track jurisdictions' funds in their special Measure T revenue. And the chair did ask if there was any funds that each jurisdiction had remaining in their revenue accounts. And so American Canyon does have 3.5 million, Calistoga 1.35 million, City of Napa 7.9 million, Napa County 4.8, St. Helena 2.3, and Yountville really likes to spend their money because they have a zero sum
Yep.
balance. And
Yountville's a winner.
And just to remind the board that the revenues generated by Measure T already have an expenditure plan that is adopted in the Measure T ordinance. The percentages are broken down in that ordinance and we cannot change them. And so City of American Canyon does receive 7.7%, Calistoga 2.7%, City of Napa 40.35%, County of Napa 39.65%, St. Helena 5.9%, and Yountville 2.7%. As mentioned, this report will be published in the Register on Monday, January 23rd, in accordance with the ordinance. But we also will be providing a glossier version that will have, I think, more pictures and highlights and narrative to the board in the next couple of months. We'll pass it out, and that will be used for your benefit for your jurisdiction to pass out to the public or at your council or board meetings to show the public kind of this is what Measure T covered for the last 2 years of the tax measure. And so that concludes my report.
Thank you. Thank you, Measure T, funds for all of our jurisdictions. Do we have any public comments or questions?
Chair Leslie, if I may, Danielle, thank you for the presentation. I think it's great. And I especially love the top chart where it talks about miles and then sidewalks and curbs. Are we tracking what the PCI is for every jurisdiction? Because if I'm a taxpayer, they want to know that there's a return on investment here. And I think that's a marker that everyone understands, the pavement condition index. So is there a way to include that in this kind of dashboard?
Yes, we can. So the Metropolitan Transportation Commission does track pavement condition indexes. So we do have that information, but I guess the cautionary tale is that the pavement conditions did go down by 1 point, I think countywide over the last, I think 2 years. And this is a large part just due to the need. The need is hundreds of millions of dollars, and, the tax revenues from Measure T are just providing a Band-Aid to really keep things at a minimum or even degrading a little bit and not bolstering it enough to get a really, large jump or increase on the
And I
pavement
appreciate
management.
it. And I guess where I'm going with it, it just illustrates the point that we need more.
Yeah.
And why this is such a critical revenue source. So if there's an opportunity to keep supporting this in the future, I think it really just illustrates that point. So again, the facts are what they are. If it's going down, it's going down. It just illustrates the need. But obviously, I think we're being good stewards of the funding, and our public works teams are doing a phenomenal job of trying to maximize every dollar. So I think it's just a good story to tell. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment and your question. That's a really good point. Anybody else? Okay, not seeing any other board members with questions. I want to open this up for public comment. Any public comment or question on this? Not seeing any.
I don't see any on my end either, but I would like to confirm the attendance of Director Knight, who joined
Oh,
us later in the
excellent.
meeting.
Very good. Thank you,
Thank you.
Director Knight, for joining us.
Thank you.
Okay. So it looks like we're seeking a motion and a second to approve that, or is this information only? This was information.
This is
only.
information
Yeah,
only.
that's
It's a requirement of the ordinance, and as I mentioned before, we'll bring back the glossy version at a later date.
That's great. And the transparency is great too. That'll be in the newspaper and jurisdictions can hand this out. Thank you. So moving on to item 9, which is just future agenda items. Are there any future agenda items for the tax agency? Not seeing any. Okay, so let's adjourn this meeting for the NVTA-TA meeting. It is now 1:44, and let's adjourn and let's start back up with the Napa Valley Transportation Authority. Okay, so calling this meeting to order, and it is still 1:44 p.m. on Wednesday, January 18th. I believe we can skip roll call because we've just had roll call and you verbally announced that Director Knight has joined us. Is that correct, Laura?
That is confirmed.
Thank you. Adoption of the agenda is item number 3. Do we have any changes to the agenda? And if there aren't any changes, do we have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
So moved, Joseph.
Second, Gregory.
We have a motion by Joseph and a second by Gregory. Roll call, please, Laura.
Leon Garcia. Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Liz Alessio,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedrosa,
Yes.
Ryan Gregory,
Yes.
Eric Hall,
Yes.
Anna Shuto,
Yes.
Eric Knight,
Yes.
and Leon Garcia. Okay, we do. Oh, thank you. Motion does pass.
Thank you. Item number 4 is public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to make a comment on this agenda? Or not on this agenda, anything not on this agenda? Okay, not seeing any. Moving on to item 5, this is the opportunity for chairpersons, board members, Metropolitan Transportation.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was trying to raise my hand for public comment.
Oh, okay, thank you. I appreciate you letting us know. Please go ahead.
Sorry about that. Yes, I'm Robert Reber, a Napa resident, and I'm here today on behalf of the Napa County Bicycle Coalition, though I believe we're also joined by our executive director, Kara Werner, and just wanted to call attention to several new laws that took effect January 1st statewide that we believe are important to raise awareness around improving cyclist and pedestrian safety. And we think this is particularly important here in Napa, which unfortunately it does not enjoy a particularly good safety ranking for traffic collisions. So several of these law changes are covered under Assembly Bill 1909, referred to as the Omni Bike Bill. And these include changes to requirements for vehicles passing cyclists. That is, whenever feasible and when sharing a lane, motorists must change lanes where safe and feasible. This replaces the prior 3-foot rule, which was a bit vague and hard to enforce. And we believe this new rule gives motorists more clarity and will give cyclists a larger buffer zone and greater safety. Another change is that e-bikes are allowed on all bikeways. This captures the new phenomenon and popularity of e-bikes, which are really expanding access for a lot of people who might not otherwise want to be able to cycle. And so this just gives them that ensured access to all bikeways. I do want to clarify, this does not necessarily apply to other motorized vehicles such as segways, motorized skateboards, or scooters. Another change is that bicycle licenses are no longer required. That is, cities and counties can't require or can enforce bicycle license laws. And we think this will help prevent some bias and harassment that has occurred in the past for certain cyclists. Another change came about through the Freedom to Walk Bill, Assembly Bill 2147, which essentially decriminalizes most jaywalking. This allows pedestrians to cross streets outside of crosswalks where it is reasonably safe to do so, where a reasonable person wouldn't anticipate or foresee a collision with a cyclist or a motorist. And lastly, although it's not a new law, we just want to remind people that, as has been the case for over a decade, it is illegal to park in bike lanes. It's also illegal to place anything, including trash collection bins in those bike lanes. And so we're hoping that by raising awareness of this and these other laws that I've mentioned, that'll improve safety on our roads for everyone, particularly cyclists and pedestrians. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Reber. I appreciate that update. So just to clarify, did you say that it's legal or illegal to park in bike lanes and put bins in bike lanes?
I'm sorry, it's illegal to
Illegal,
park.
perfect.
Illegal, sorry if I was unclear. So illegal to park or essentially place anything that would obstruct cyclists in those bike lanes.
Excellent. That's good news. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other public comments? Okay,
I previously saw a hand raised by Kara Werner. Kara, do you have a public comment?
I'm sorry, no, I was just trying to reinforce Robert's hand that was raised.
Thank you.
thank you. Okay. All right, so now moving on to the chairperson's board members, MTC and ABAG updates. Do we have an update from MTC, Director Pedrosa?
We do, Madam Chair. It's been a busy month at MTC. We did have some commissioners depart us. starting with Mayor Sam Liccardo and Mayor from Oakland, Libby Schaft. They were honored for their service, but they decided to pursue greener pastures and whatever they decide to do. Solano County Supervisor Jim Spearing, while he did not run for re-election, their mayor's council made a very wise decision to keep him on as a representative of Solano County. So he's continuing to serve on MTC, even though he's not elected, but a tremendous ally for the North Bay and a great mentor. We also did, the commission approved the State Route 37 MOU to finalize the organizational restructuring to include Napa Marin Sonoma, also known as SMART, as a member of the Executive Steering Committee. On the Bay Area Infrastructure Finance Authority, the point is, we submitted an application to the California Transportation Commission to authorize the tolling on State Route 37 from Sears Point to Mare Island. And then on the Program and Allocation Committee, we did have some successes. We were awarded some funding, I believe $9.2 million included from the planning funds. And to our friends and residents of American Canyon, we also pursued $1.5 million for State Route 29 for American Canyon on the improvement of the environmental phase. And we are hopeful that there's going to be another 1.5 million coming to support that endeavor, which is deeply needed for our South County partners. On the executive committee, we've been knee deep on network management, which is a complicated endeavor, but one that's so needed for our region. Many of you know and have heard me say there's 27 transit operators and they all do a phenomenal job. But I think the pandemic provided us an opportunity to look at how do we envision transportation and mobility in the future? And that requires us getting a little uncomfortable of how do we make sure we provide service for not just those that are using transportation today, but those that are going to use transportation in the future. And we've had some great kickoff meetings. I believe Chair Alessio and Vice Chair Joseph were on a meeting last week that I had to chair. And it was really great to hear from local electeds about being protective of our local service, which is totally appropriate. But I think the opportunity, and we're going to have to get a little uncomfortable, is how do we not look at it from a local control perspective, but what's the best system and structure to provide the best transportation for those that need transportation. And that also comes with some key performance indicators that I think we're going to hear at the commission on January 25th. And at some point, we'll talk about all the nice graphs of what regional network management might mean. But we do envision regional network management being part of MTC, where we would have a dedicated person that kind of oversees that with some stakeholder participation. Our executive director, Kate Miller, has been having a seat at the table and really representing a small rural perspective to that. So busy month, and we are finalizing the recruitment for our executive director. We've been part of that. We chair the ad hoc committee for that, and we're down to 2 candidates, and we're hopeful that we'll make a decision January 30th. So we'll have a new leader for the region, and we are going to be providing a great send off to Therese McMillan, who's been our fearless leader at MTC for quite some time. But she also has decided to retire. There's kind of a theme going on, if y'all know, but she's been a great ally to the North Bay. She knows our region, but we're hopeful that the 2 new candidates will also know who we are and make sure that we try to continue to get more money. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Director Pedrosa, and all the work that you do on MTC and your leadership there. We really appreciate it. Are there any questions from the board? Yes,
Thank you.
Director Chateau.
Thank you so much for that and your service. I'm curious, do you have any examples of what that regional perspective would look like
On the regional
for
network.
the transportation?
Yeah.
You're talking about that. How does that impact us? Just
Well,
what vision? What does that future look like?
You know what? I will speak as an individual because I need to kind of be Switzerland as chair of MTC. But I think to me, what I would say, Director, is, imagine a system where you can go from Napa all the way to San Francisco and not worry about fares and schedules. It's all coordinated. And I think for us, we do a pretty good job of coordinating with our partners on the north southwest. But when you're in the Bay Area and you have to go from the ferry service to BART to Caltrain, I think there's some improvements we can make to ensure that's a better transition from a fare structure. The fact is, I think everyone here at the dais probably can ride different modes of transportation, but there's a segment of our community that can't. So we have to make sure that we're as accommodating as possible. In some regions, there's only one operator that runs all of it. I'm not saying that's where we're going, but do I think there's an opportunity to work better together in some regions? Absolutely. And I think that's the goal of this regional network management. What it's going to require us all is maybe not focus on local control, focus on what's best for the users. So that way it's a sustainable system going forward, because the fact of the matter is we can't afford the system we're in right now. There's a lot of fiscal cliffs. Director Miller knows about that. BART's projected to be out of money by 2026, 2027. So those are the realities of what we're facing. So, but you did remind me in terms of, because you're a representative from Up Valley, we continue to do some work on the roundabouts that we've been pushing. We've been able to secure some funding. And I believe we're going to have some public outreach happening pretty soon too.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Or Director Pedrosa? Not seeing any online that I can tell. Do we have an ABAG update? Is Director Leon Garcia, are you
Yes.
still with us?
Sorry, no update. We're a bit out of sync. The ABAG meets tomorrow. So I will have something for you next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
But we're looking forward to celebrating our executive director's retirement and all that she has contributed over the time. She's done a wonderful job.
Thank you very much. And do we, looks like that's it. Any other updates from any of our directors? Not seeing any. Okay, let's move on to item 6, which is the executive director update from Director Miller. Do you have an update for us, Dr. Miller?
Good afternoon. The first thing I want to do is welcome our new board member, Director Chateau. Welcome, representing the city of St. Helena. We're happy to have you on board and looking forward to working with you. Also, the city of Calistoga has appointed Kevin Eisenberg to serve as the second member on the board. We will welcome him next month. He is currently in the training that the League of Cities is providing to newly elected officials. Last week, I attended the Transportation Research Board Annual Conference in Washington, and I was honored to attend a reception for Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg. In attendance there was my friend, the FTA Administrator Nuria Fernandez, also the FTA, the newly appointed FHWA Administrator Shaylin Bott was there, and then I should have mentioned this first, but the Deputy Secretary of Transportation, Polly Trottenberg, was also there. And then I also had the opportunity to talk to the person that has been tasked to deal with supply chain issues and gave him an earful about switch gears. So I'm not sure that's going to make any difference to our two projects that have been waiting and may be waiting for another year to get to switch gears, but I am hopeful. On January 12th, MTC held a webinar for transit agency board members about the regional network management process and what is hoped to be to get out of it. MTC limited the participation to 2 board members to honor the Brown Act for each agency. And so Chair Alessio and Vice Chair Joseph were invited to attend. Danielle is going to be providing a presentation. I think it's the exact same presentation so that everybody's up to date on what's going on. And I would just preface that with, it's very preliminary and we all are anxiously awaiting a really strong direction moving forward. Victoria Ortiz, an assistant planner who's sitting in the back of the room right now, has resigned her position. I don't mean to call you out, Victoria, but she is an associate planner. She is going to be an associate planner at the city of San Diego, and her last day is today, and we wish her all the best. She's been really a wonderful employee at NVTA, so come back anytime. The new and improved Ride the Vine app will go live on January 29th. The app is used to schedule door-to-door on-demand services in the small jurisdictions on the shuttles and on the stop-to-stop services in the city of Napa. It should be a whole new and improved app, so fingers crossed that everything goes well with that. The Acorn Planting event at Skyline Park on Monday, January 16th, otherwise MLK Day, was a big success. 80 people turned up to plant 100 trees, and the January 16th event in St. Helena was canceled due to weather conditions. And as a reminder, this effort is to mitigate the to mitigate the felling of trees that was required in order to complete the Vine Trail project between Calistoga and St. Helena. On February 27th at 5 p.m., NVTA will be offering newly elected officials from all jurisdictions in Napa County an opportunity to learn more about NVTA and NVTA-TA. This is specifically directed for members not on the NVTA boards. This workshop is focused, we are currently scheduling orientation meetings, and I think most of them have been done, except for we have one more with Kevin Eisenberg, and we will have already done then the orientations for our new board members. This month, I'd like to acknowledge Rebecca Shank. Rebecca is the transit manager at NVTA, and she is in the back of the room, and is always ready and willing to help out on all aspects of the work we do. Rebecca has stepped up as a competent project manager to both fill in when we had no engineers and to help out Grant when he is shorthanded. She is always a willing participant at NVTA's extracurricular events, including tabling at events at night, during weekends, planting acorns to help with project mitigation, et cetera, et cetera. So I just wanted to acknowledge and appreciate her dedication to the agency. Thank you, Rebecca, for everything you do. And that concludes my executive director report.
Thank you. Excellent report and update. And we echo your feelings about Rebecca. We see her out in the community and here too. So we appreciate all she does. Are there any questions or comments for the director? Yes.
I do. I have a question. Will the St. Helena planting be rescheduled?
It is being rescheduled, but I don't have a date, and we don't have a date yet. But we will definitely get the word out, and obviously it'd be great to see you there.
I will be there and I'll help
Okay.
get the word out.
Great.
Thank you. Okay, so we're moving on to item number 7. Do we have a Caltrans representative here today that will be giving us an update? Is it Danielle Chang?
Yes, I'm filling in for Amani for an update. So I'll start. Basically, we still have 3 projects that are in PID phase that is still ongoing. We still have 7 projects in the environmental phase. We're hopeful probably 4J820 Tulip Cape Bridge. We're still trying to get that into the design phase. If not this month, maybe next month. 5-way intersection that is still a work in progress with the co-op. And we are still trying to finish the environmental for 02790. In the design phase, we have 15 projects in PS&E phase. Again, 0Q830 is a work in progress. 3Q760, that project is sliding, but we are hopeful to get that, the design for the rumble strip job, probably either this month or next month, hopefully RTLs. Other than that, everything else is a work in progress. We have 12 projects in construction. We wrapped up, I think, 4J300, which is a CAPM job on Napa 29 last year, I believe in October. And then we wrapped up Huchica Creek 4G210 on Route 121. I think in December, it's going to be in mitigation. So those are 2 jobs that are mostly completed. Other than that, I think that's all I have for an update from Caltrans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chang. Do we have any questions from any of the board members? And Laura, I can't see the gallery right now, so can you look and see if anybody in the gallery has a question? No? Any public comment?
There's not.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you so much, Mr. Chang.
Director Alessio, I
Yes.
just want to acknowledge the Caltrans team and all the work that they're doing during the storms, and even opening State Route 37 under impossible conditions. So thank you, Daniel, for you and the work that you all do.
Thank you.
Director Miller.
Thank you. I'll relay that to Amani and the rest of the team.
Thank you very much. Moving on to number 8 for presentations. 8.1 is informational only. And Grant Bailey is going to provide us a project update on the regional network management approach. Is that correct? Oh, no, that says Daniel Schmidt. Now I'm confused. It is Grant. Okay. Okay. Very good. That's right. The next is 8.2. Thank you. You're ready to go, Grant? Perfect.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Alicio.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Oh, let me see if I can move this.
There we
a
go.
little
Just
bit better.
need to speak a little bit more
There,
into it.
okay.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Chair Alicio, Vice Chair Joseph, and members of the board. My name is Grant Bailey. I'm the Program Manager Engineer for NVTA, and this afternoon I'll be giving you an update of our current projects. Next slide, please. So the first project we'll be discussing is the Vine Trail St. Helena to Calistoga project, which is building an 8-mile segment of the Vine Trail connecting Calistoga to St. Helena, and furthers the ultimate build out of the 47-mile Vine Trail connecting Calistoga to Vallejo. Just some quick milestones. We began construction on July 5th in Calistoga, and we actually completed the reach within the city of Calistoga, Reach 7, paving on September 30th, and we're working to close out some punch list items before we complete fully in Calistoga. Some upcoming work, as you're aware, we've had a lot of rain, so the project has had some delays over the last 3 or 4 weeks. We are looking forward to the project south of Dunawheel Lane to the south end of NVTA-TA State Park, which are referred to as reaches 4 through 6, drying out here in the next couple of days so we can continue work on the retaining walls, which should hopefully take us into final grading and paving of those reaches sometime in February. Following final grading and paving in reaches 4 through 6, we'll finalize the signalization of crossings at both NVTA-TA State Park. And hopefully following that work, we'll get into reaches 1 through 3, which is the southern portion of the project south of both NVTA-TA State Park down to Pratt Avenue. But we are waiting for the utility project, which PG&E's utility project to complete. They were delayed up until this month, and they're continuing construction of that project and slated to complete in April of this year. Some of the issues and risks, the major one that I've just mentioned is kind of the utility conflicts and resolutions we've been working through with PG&E. Happy to report that most of the conflicts have been resolved in reaches 4 through 6, and we are working closely with PG&E to work through the remaining conflicts in reaches 1 through 3. So next slide, please. Just a quick snapshot of the project progress through December of 2022. We have worked through about 57% of the total working days on the project and issued 21% of the total contract value in the form of progress payments. There's a pretty large disparity you can see here, and we'd like to see these values tracking closer. There are probably 2 main reasons for what you're seeing here. One is the conflicts that we encountered with underground utilities, PG&E's underground utilities, but also the rain that we recently had delayed the paving work in reaches 4 through 6, which we had hoped to complete by the end of 2022. Had we completed that work, I think we would be closer to paying out around 40% of the total contract value, which would have gotten us a lot closer to our working days completed. Once it dries out a little bit more out there, and as mentioned, we should have work paving completed sometime in February, weather permitting. Next slide, please. Moving on to the Vine Bus Maintenance Facility, which is our NVTA's new bus maintenance facility located on Sheehy Court, which will provide a new or modernized 6-bus bay maintenance facility, operations center, and bus wash. And will also accommodate NVTA's transition to electric bus fleet. A few milestones. Construction began on this project in January of 2022. We are working towards completing all structural steel for all 3 structures on the project site this month. And by March of 2023, we should have all underground utilities completed and the building roofs installed as well. Some of the ongoing activities right now are working to get the maintenance building weather tight, getting the weather barrier installed. You'll see a photo of that on the next slide here. On the operations building, they're working to finalize the roof install, as well as lay out interior wall framing and perform that install. The major issue or risk that we are experiencing with this project, and Executive Director Miller alluded to this earlier, is procurement of electrical equipment. We were informed earlier this month that our electrical switchgear, which is a piece of equipment that is necessary to power the entire facility, has been delayed to December of 2023. So that being said, construction is still on track to complete in August or possibly September of this year. The building would be move-in ready at that time if it weren't for this delay to the switchgear equipment. We are doing everything we can to work with our contractor, their electrical material supplier, Eaton, to accelerate procurement of that piece of equipment. But it's a pretty challenging environment we're working in right now. Next slide, please. Another snapshot of progress to date through December of 2022 on this project. We've worked through about 62% of the total working days in the contract and spent about 60% of the total contract value. As you can see, this is a lot closer. These two metrics are a lot closer tracking, and indicates a pretty successful project to date and very healthy project. You can see there are two photos there of the maintenance building. The top photo is from November 2022, shows kind of the skeleton of the building, structural steel framing on the exterior, some of the roof decking going in. And then on the lower photo taken just about a week ago, you can see there's that weather barrier going in. The roof membrane is also installed, and there's some sheer plywood going up on that front-facing building. Next slide, please. Just a quick note about our NVTA's and Vine's transition to zero-emission fleet. We are on track to transition the entire fleet from internal combustion engine to electric or zero-emission buses by 2030, which is 10 years ahead of schedule of the Air Resource Board mandate. To date, we have had 7 buses delivered, and we currently have $14 million of available funding to purchase 14 additional buses and associated charging infrastructure. We have not placed the order for those buses yet because we don't have a place to put them. So once the bus maintenance facility is complete or gets closer to completion and we have a place to store the buses and charge them, we will place orders for them. Next slide, please. Moving on to the Mola Avenue Park and Ride Improvements Project. This project was meant to facilitate better access to the express bus route through Vine Transit by installing 2 bus pullouts on the on and off ramp to Highway 29 at Mola Avenue. This project, or the base project, is 99% complete at this point. We have some minor punch list items remaining. However, during construction, NVTA made the decision to, issue a change order or expand the scope of this project and install electric vehicle charging infrastructure at the park and ride. We are under contract with a local electrical contractor. However, similar to the bus maintenance facility, we are experiencing long lead times to procure the electrical switchgear necessary to power those electric charging stations. Currently, the switchgear is slated to be delivered in December of 2023, and so we should have that final piece of the park and ride up and running early 2024. Next slide, please. The final project I'll talk about that is currently in construction is the Sosco Junction project. So this project will reduce congestion on State Route 29 by removing a signalized intersection at SR 221 Sosco Ferry and State Route 29 by adding grade separated roundabouts underneath State Route 29. So the current status of this project is, the contractor closed Sosco Ferry Road and access to State Route 29 and State Route 221 from Sausal Ferry Road in December. They are currently working towards demolition of Sausal Ferry later this month, and then starting mass excavation to lower the area where you see those roundabouts on the slide. The access to 221, northbound 221 is currently detoured, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide there. The major risk we have for this project is late in December, the contractor identified slow excavation conditions as a result of unidentified rocky strata within the project area. It wasn't identified fully in the project documents. We are working with the contractor to track those costs, and once the full and final costs have been submitted for delays or inefficiencies associated with that, we will work with the contractor to negotiate a fair price. Just a quick note on schedule. Project began in June of 2022. It's a little bit over a 2-year-long project, and we are on schedule to complete construction in October of 2024. Next slide, please. All right, so moving on to State Route 29 American Canyon Multimodal Improvements Project. This project is currently in the planning or project initiation document phase. And we're actually waiting for final approval of that document. We're hoping to get it sometime this month. And that document analyzed different alternatives through the corridor and makes a recommendation to further assess 2 alternatives, one being maintaining the existing layout of the corridor with or maintaining all intersections. I think there's 6 intersections that were assessed. And so we'd maintain the signalized intersections throughout the corridor. And then the other alternative would be to install roundabouts at 5 of the 6 intersections. The final alternative will be recommended through the environmental phase, which as soon as we get the project initiation document finalized, we'll move into that phase. As Director Pedroza mentioned earlier, we have secured $1.5 million in OBAG 3 funding for this project, and there's an additional $1.5 million that looks promising to fully fund the environmental phase for this project. Pending funding approval, we are looking to finalize PID this month, work through environmental into 2024, which will then begin our design and right-of-way phases into 2025, and we're targeting starting construction in 2026. Next slide, please. Next project is the Napa Valley Forward project. This will make improvements to 3 intersections along State Route 29 at Rutherford Road, Oakville Cross Road, and Madison Avenue. Unfortunately, this project was recently, or NVTA was recently informed that the RAISE grant that we applied for funding for this project was not selected. So we kind of regrouped, and as a new strategy to securing funding for this project, we've phased it. And so in phase 1, we'll be looking at making improvements to Rutherford Road and Oakville Cross Road. There's it's a reduced cost, which makes securing funding more likely. And then as we can secure additional funding, we will move into phase 2 to make improvements at Madison Avenue. Next slide, please. The Amola Corridor Complete Streets Improvement Project is a complete streets project that will make multimodal and safety improvements along Amola Avenue from Foster Road in City of Napa to 4th Avenue in unincorporated Napa County. Similar to the Napa Forward project, NVTA was informed earlier this month that the ATP application that we submitted for this project was not selected, or this project was not funded through ATP funds. So we are continuing to search for additional funding to move this project forward. One of the promising prospects is the ATP application for the 2024 cycle. Next slide, please. And then the last project I'll talk about, which is really two projects is the State Route 37 improvements project. The first phase of this project is the Sears Point to Mayor Island Improvements Project, which will add a high occupancy vehicle lane to improve traffic flow and peak travel times and increase vehicle occupancy, making transit viable on State Route 37 corridor. The project development team is working hard to finalize the environmental impact report this month. I think we're looking for some final signatures from Caltrans so we can move into the design phase. As Director Pedroza also mentioned, we submitted the tolling application to the CTC this month, which will assist in funding this project, as well as the long-term build out of the entire corridor improvements. So next slide, please. And so the ultimate project, as it's being referred to as, is the SR 37 corridor improvements between Novato and Vallejo. This project proposes to improve SR 37 with a elevated causeway to avoid sea level rise and other issues brought about by climate change. Let's see, this project is a relatively long-term project. It's estimated to cost $7 billion. And so the tolling will assist in funding this project. And the delivery timeline is 15 to 20 years. Next slide, please. With that, I will open it up for any questions.
Thank you, Grant. I appreciate all those updates. There's a lot happening, a lot of projects and projects to look forward to, in the near and far future. Do we have any board members that have any questions? Yes, Director Gregory.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. I'm fascinated whenever I drive through the Southfield Junction project as a civil engineer. I can't believe I haven't been in a car accident yet. I'm just really curious, and people are starting to ask how the heck are they going to phase all this work that's coming soon. You don't need to tell us now, but is there a phasing plan you might send us just so we can better address those questions that are going to start coming?
Yeah, yes, I'm probably not fully prepared to answer that question, but it is phased. In fact, I think there's multiple phases or multiple parts to about 4 total phases to the project with different traffic handling plans. I'm certainly happy to share that with the board.
I'd love to see it. Yep. And then second on, in terms of traffic through American Canyon on Highway 29, I have found personally that with the finish of the end of Jameson Canyon, that approach via Red Top Road to get to westbound 80 is very viable these days, preferred in some cases. And are we finding that? And are we starting to maybe encourage that to take some load off of American Canyon?
Well, I mean, I think one thing that was interesting is even before that new improvement was opened, we saw a drop in traffic in American Canyon from the travel behavior study that we did in the transportation plan. I guess it was 7 years ago to the one we just completed. So there was like a 4-year gap between those two studies. And in between there, Highway 12 had opened up, the widening. I anticipate that this improvement is also going to encourage more people to do a go around on American Canyon, which is great in some ways, but also, bypassing American Canyon doesn't support the commerce in American Canyon. But if we can figure out a way to make sure that commerce is healthy and traffic is little, then we will have succeeded in what we're trying to do. So I think that the improvements that we're proposing in the PID that's about ready to be approved by Caltrans, I think it's going to be a huge improvement on how we move traffic through there. So fingers crossed, that we get the resources that we need to build that.
Thank you. Director Garcia and then Director Pedroza.
Yes, thank you. A couple of things that might be worth examining from the corridor, American Canyon north. We had a couple of more than 1 or 2 incidents this flooding season, with 29 being closed just north of Paoli Loop. So what we were able to do is get people directed over to Green Island Road and up to Devlin and on their way north. Hopefully some commuters have discovered that that's going to a very convenient way to get onto 29 if you get up to Saskville. Don't have to go through the Saskville intersection so much. You can actually make that. So I was interested in that piece there where the road was removed there at Saskville by the restaurant. But yeah, that's a way to travel often. Actually, you can go straight forward on it and go up what the road there is by DMV, gets you up close to Napa Valley College and back on Saskville into Napa. So you avoid all that intersection. Anyway, it was a way of being able to provide emergency relief for commuters going north, because absent the Devlin Road improvement, there would be no option other than to go all the way out to 80, come back on 12 and go north. And we've had experience that in the past. So that's been quite an asset. And I quite agree, the commerce through American Canyon is something that we should support as well. But just like to give you that update. Thank you. Still haven't figured out how to get my face on my screen, but don't have any technical support around that I could work with on that. Anyway, I'm here.
Thank you, Director Garcia. Director Pedrosa.
Thank you, Chair Alessio. And I just want to thank staff. You know, look, I get to get a perspective of how hard it is to try to find all these funding sources. It is not easy. And we are embarking on numerous projects that require so many different funding sources. And both Kate and Danielle have been very steadfast in trying to apply for as many grants as possible. We haven't had the success all the time, but I'm confident that we're going to be able to deliver on some of this. It's going to take some patience. And I'll just say, I think we're doing a great job of looking at how we're allocating resources. We have some money being spent up Valley with some roundabouts, but I really want to look at, you know, American Canyon. I do think that is a regional issue. It's going to become more of a attention as we build more housing, and some of the housing allocation numbers that American Canyon is taking on in the city of Napa. I think it's a regional issue, and it's something that should require an extra focus on us, whether it's what we're doing on 29 or any parallel road activity. I think creating capacity in the southern part benefits us all. So I just think that's something that we have to be mindful. And I think the project list kind of illustrate that. But Grant, great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pedrosa. Are there any other questions or comments by the board? Yes, Dr. Joseph, Vice Chair.
Just to ditto those remarks, I think the improvements that we're currently going through the PID process on 29 will certainly help. And the parallel road on Newell is going to help. And I think you're right. There will be people saying, I'm going to just stay on 80 and cut over at 12, which we may lose some trips, but the reality is there are probably commuters who had no intentions to stopping in American Canyon unless they're low on gas. So that's appreciated. And we'll try to build up our retail capacity in some other fashion. Thank you. And yes, this was a great report. I appreciate these quarterly reports and looking forward to getting the attachment so I can pass it on to my colleagues back home.
Thank you, Vice Chair Joseph. Any others? Yes, Dr. Shushel.
Thank you. I'm just starting to get used to and understand the projects in a bigger, deeper way. So thank you so much. I, of course, am looking at the Upper Valley projects and those roundabouts, or if it's a traffic signal, I think that's still to be determined if it's one or two roundabouts. Is that right?
Well, to be clear, we're actually studying two alternatives at each intersection. So when you said signal, both the Oakville and the Rutherford that is one alternative, has not been supported by the public yet, historically has not been supported by the public. But the Madison intersection is currently a signal, and we are phasing it, making it phase 2, because a lot of the grant funding right now is very focused on safety. And removing the signal is not likely to necessarily do a huge amount for safety. We'll do a lot for operations. So we're really hoping to sort of narrow what we're asking for from the federal government by doing that. And then we will address the Madison project later on.
Okay, thank you so much.
If I may, Chair Leslie, I think for the benefit of Director Shuto, we've been working on these projects for quite some time. We've done a lot of stakeholder outreach, which I think would be very beneficial if we share that with you, because this was kind of a organic process that started with a local initiative that morphed with some participation from the vintners and Visit Napa Valley and some willing property owners. And so far, at some intersections, you have property owners that are a little bit more willing to talk about how they might be impacted, others are not. But it is an incredible opportunity to look at the safety, but also the traffic flow as well.
Thank you, because I'm so interested in how we also, as a county, of course, like all of us, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And I know in St. Helena, the thing that we have going for us is we have great jobs, and it's gotten so cost prohibitive to live up there. I'm very interested in how can we move more people from different parts of the county and make it so they can actually have access to those jobs, and transportation and actually being able to get there is such a big part of it. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions from the directors? Okay, and any from the public? Just to put that out there, not seeing any. Thank you, Grant. Excellent report. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving on to 8.2, and this is the update on regional network management approach by Danielle. Danielle.
Yes. And as Laura is pulling up the PowerPoint, I'll just give you a little bit of the history. So Danielle Schmitz, and I'm here to present the Metropolitan Transportation Commission's Regional Network Management Framework. So over the last year, the MTC has been working on a business case recommendation for a regional network management for Bay Area transit. And as Director Pedroza mentioned, there's 27 transit operators in the Bay Area. So next slide. The impetus of the regional network spawned from transit riders, business groups, stakeholders wanting better regional connectivity amongst the Bay Area transit systems. In May of 2020, MTC created a 32-member Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force that they deemed the task force to support MTC in the development of the regional response to address the adverse impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic onto the transit system. As you are well aware of, there was a precipitous decline in transit ridership. At that time, in July of 2021, the task force approved 27 specific near-term actions to reshape the region's transit system into a more connected, efficient, and user-focused mobility framework across the entire Bay Area, which formed the Bay Area Transit Transformation Action Plan. And as part of this plan, the regional network management structure was born, and MTC established a network management business case evaluation to assess a recommended regional network management framework to be better focused around the end user, which is the transit rider in the Bay Area. So next slide. So to ensure that there was full transparency and opportunity, there was a 14-member advisory group convened by MTC. It did have representation, as you can see on this slide, from the transit agencies. So there was 7 transit agency representatives, as well as 7 stakeholder representatives. Stakeholders were agencies like ours. The Sonoma County Transportation Agency Executive Director was one, as well as some business industry groups. Next slide. And so they met 8 times over the last year to come up with this regional network management framework or approach of how MTC was going to carry out a lot of these transit improvements region-wide. So using a business case evaluation approach, which was a 5-step process, they built off the 6 functional areas from those 27 kind of action frameworks. The 6 functional areas that they really focused on were fare integration policy, wayfinding and mapping, bus transit priority, accessible services, rail network management, and connected network planning. And the second step established in this 5-step process is establishing a framework and guiding principles for what activities would be better done at a regional level versus a local level. And so in steps 3 and 4, MTC was identifying gaps of where there could be improvements. And based off this, an overall model was developed that is now the regional network framework has been identified and proposed for action by the MTC Commission, which will go before the MTC Commission next Wednesday, January 25th. So next slide. So to really delve into the meat of the framework, I'll go over the mission and vision statement. So the mission statement is to drive transformative improvements in the customer experience for regional Bay Area transit. And the vision, which is the why this is all being done, is to advance regional goals in equity, livability, climate, resiliency through a unified regional transit system that serves all Bay Area populations. Next slide. So the business case analysis, which explored what benefits could come from regionalizing some elements of the transit system across an array of transit operator roles and activities, the business case asked, will regionalizing these activities do these 3 things? And those 3 things are improve the customer experience, unlock efficiencies, and be feasible. So improving the customer experiences, is it going to reduce travel times? It's going to simplify the user interface. Is it going to unlock efficiencies, meaning is there some economies of scale that can be achieved? Is there cost sharing elements? And then is it feasible? So, can it be achieved within the Bay Area framework? Next slide. So the proposed regional network management structure will need 3 elements. And so this is kind of the meat of the framework. So it will need a regional visioning element. And the regional visioning element is setting a strategic vision for Bay Area transit and drives the direction. So this is going to be at the policy level, and really thinking about the large vision, the high level overall, why we're doing this, thinking about the customers and the outcomes. The next element would be the steering element. And the steering element is to develop regional policy and decision makers. So bringing together all the general managers of the transit operators as well as MTC staff who have the wherewithal because they're the operators of the transit system currently and are decision makers because they're high enough level. That's why you're going to see the Regional Network Management Council at this level, because that's the steering element level where reaching consensus and policy recommendations can happen. And so the next element is the administrative element. And this element is important to have dedicated staff that can execute and is responsible for delivering this vision from the steering committee or the steering element and the visioning element. Next slide. So this is a snapshot. It's very confusing looking, but this is a snapshot of what this framework, this governance would look like. And if you see the structure hits the marks on the right-hand side from MTC's business case scenario, it's customer focused, it's structured for scale, and it balances short and long-term goals. And it's set up similar to a lot of MTC commission or committees currently. So for instance, Supervisor Petroza, who's the MTC commissioner, sits on the policy or the programming and allocations committee. So he's on the MT commission, but he's a commissioner that sits on a certain committee. So what MTC is proposing here is that you have the large MTC commission, and they're going to create a regional network management committee. And that committee would be a subset of certain commissioners that will be geographically representation of, the transit operators because of where they are in the Bay. And they will be the regional network management committee. And if you look over to the left, the voice of the customer, that's an advisory committee. And the advisory committee is where you would have citizens, stakeholders, transit riders serve on that committee, and they would be then providing input recommendations back to the regional network management committee. And then under the regional network management committee, you have the regional network management council, who would be people like Kate, who is the executive director of a small operator, or the GM of BART would sit on this, or SFMTA. And that's kind of the steering committee, because like I said before, they're the implementers. They know transit. They know how it operates and what they can and cannot do. And so they're really going to be the steering committee. The Regional Network Management Committee will be the policy, the visioning element, and then the voice of the customer will be the advisory committee. So, sorry. And then the director of the Regional Network Management will be the administrative and staff level people that MTC will hire to carry out the vision, mission, and actions of the Network Management Committee. So next slide, please. The MTC Commission, as mentioned before, would have the MTC Regional Network Management Committee would have 8 representatives from the commission. It would also have non-voting transit board members, as well as a state representative, as seen here. None of these commissioners or members of this committee have been formed, but this is kind of the framework of what MTC is envisioning. Next slide. And then, as mentioned before, the voice of the customer is really important, because really you have to think about the end user. So everything that's highlighted with a green bubble, or anything that has a green around it, is all the points, engagement points for the customer. And so, you know, whether it be at the staff level or the committee level or the advisory committee level, really bringing back full circle, always engaging with the customer is a focus of MTC for their regional network management framework. And, you know, the advisory committee would be made up of 8 or 9 members from MTC's Policy Advisory Council. We, Napa County, have 2 members on that Policy Advisory Council, Terry Scott, as well as Michael Baldini, who's also the chair of the CAC. So, you know, we would be tied to the voice of the Citizen Customer Advisory Committee. Next slide. So how will the short-term framework drive long-term evolution? And it's really going to be based off performance. So anything that the Regional Network Management Committee and staff bring forward, any action items or processes, would be evaluated through key performance indicators. And this is to support continuous improvement in this establishment of the Regional Network Management Committee. And there will be a process for every 2 years. The key KPIs would be revisited, refined, and go through a formal review process. So as you can see from this slide, we're very much at the beginning of the regional network management. And there's a lot of work between now and, you know, 3 years from now, where we would kind of have a long-term regional network management framework that's in process and moving forward. And we have actionable items that are being implemented by the different transit operators around the Bay Area. Next slide. So key milestones and next steps. MTC and the consultants that they've been working with have been meeting with transit operators, the advisory group, to provide updates on the regional network management framework. A presentation very similar to this one will be at the full MTC Commission next Wednesday, January 25th. And then it will come back to the full MTC Commission in February for approval and action. And then from there, once the structure of the regional network management framework is set up with the Regional Network Management Committee and the council, they would then move into the implementation plan and launch of that framework. And so, you know, with that concludes the presentation and report. I know it's a lot of information to take in at one time. So if you mull it over and have questions, feel free to reach out to Kate or myself, as well as if we can't answer your question, MTC staff, we can direct you to MTC staff. I would say from a small operator perspective, you know, the Vine Transit is a small operator. We're still going to provide local service. And, you know, as much as a regional network framework and management and actions can help improve regional service. I think we're, willing to have skin in this game, and we will bring further actions from the Regional Network Management Committee to the NVTA board. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Danielle. Very informative, and it was good to go over everything. Do we have any questions or comments by board, by our directors? Yes, Vice Chair Joseph.
Just one question that I raised at the webinar earlier, and that is to get a sense of the magnitude of regional trips versus local trips. Does anyone have that kind of data? And I bring that up because I think this regional mobility is great for the person who lives here and wants to go to San Francisco or something. But how, what's the size of that market? Because if it's 3 or 4%, no matter how efficient we get, we're not going to get much money as a return. But if it's a larger percentage, then it really behooves us to make it work more efficiently. So to me, that would be like one of the baseline pieces of information.
You want me to respond to that?
Sure. I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for some systems, the commuter service is separated in the National Transit Database data that they submit. Other systems like Caltrain and Ferry are exclusively commuter services. BART is a mixture of both, and it's impossible really for them to understand. It's easy to understand because they can have the data of who's getting on at what stop and who's getting off at what stop, especially now with the Clipper card. I would say that in general, in the Central Bay Area, the commuter service makes up a significant amount. And here it makes up probably a relatively small amount. I'm really interested in what MTC is going to do to balance resources between, per your point, populations that really rely on transit service, especially local service, and how they're going to balance that with commuter service who tend to be, wealthier population. There is a Title VI requirement that they have to meet, which means that they have to make sure that they are not disproportionately underserving protected groups. So I think a lot of that is going to have to be sorted out as we go. I know it's a long-winded answer. I wish I had the numbers in front of me, but I don't.
I appreciate that because you're right. From my perspective here, Napa, I would assume, it's a fairly small regional number, but you're right. As you get closer to the, San Francisco, you're right that they're all over the place. And it does kind of reinforce the fact, just as probably the most financially lucrative routes for us are the express routes to BART and all that, aren't necessarily the most, critical in terms of equity and for disadvantaged groups. So it is a balancing act. I think it's important to remember that part of the role of transit isn't to make money per se, it's to provide a service to those who can't afford it. And it's easy to get caught up in the thought that, well, this is like a service and you ought to make money and all that stuff, but there's a social function to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any? Okay, Danielle, thank you very much for that. We are moving on to item 9, which is the consent agenda. Do any board members wish to pull any of the items from the consent agenda? Not seeing any in the room. I don't see anybody in the virtual room. So do we have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda? Okay, we have a motion by Pedrosa.
Second, Garcia.
Second by Garcia. Thank you. A roll call, please, Laura.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Liz Alessio,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Petroza,
Yes.
Ryan Gregory,
Yes.
Eric Hall,
Yes.
Anna Shuto,
Yes.
and Eric Knight.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We're on to regular agenda items. And so item 10.1, this is an action item. And Antonio, who's stepped up on Murado, will present this item. You'll find this on pages 69 to 168, and it's the Napa Valley Transportation Authority Annual Financial Statement with Independent Auditor's Report for the years ended June 30, 2022 and 2021, and a single audit report of uniform guidance. Thank you, Antonio.
Sure. So good afternoon, Chair Alessio and members of the board. My name is Antonio Honorado, and I'm the Director of Finance here for the NVTA. Now you're probably suffering from some presentation fatigue, so I'm going to have another one for you, but hopefully it'll be relatively brief. So for this item, staff is asking the board to accept and file the financial statements with independent auditor report for the fiscal years ending June 30th, 2022 and 2021, which is attachment number 2, and the NVTA single audit report of uniform guidance for the year ended June 30th, 2022. And also as a second action item, return an allocation surplus of $163,517 to the local transportation fund for future reallocation. If you can go to the second slide, please. So for this PowerPoint presentation, it's in regards to kind of a global view of the financial position of NVTA. Of course, the audited financial statements provide a much more comprehensive overlook of the agency's financial position. And I'm confident that all of you have read all 80 pages of it. So there's going to be a pop quiz at the end, but I'm going to try and abbreviate the financials into a 5-slide deck here. But I know at the end of the day, the questions you want to know is how much did we get? How much did we spend? And where are we financially? So this slide here is actually cobbled up information from the financial statements to give you more of a global view of our finances. And financial statements have accounting treatments, have accounting standards. Money gets shifted around from one element to another. And so unless you're a CPA or understand how financial statements read, it's kind of hard to get an understanding of what exactly where the financial position of the agency is. So the financial statements itself has a 2-year overview. For here, I wanted to provide a 3-year outlook because I wanted to show you where we're currently at versus where we were the previous year versus where we were a while ago, which was the start of the pandemic year. And then I'm reading this from right to left, actually. So in the pandemic year, which was fiscal year 20, the agency was coming into the pandemic year with a position of financial strength. For the general fund, we had several projects in the pipeline, specifically Saskell Junction, the Vine Trail. So we had pre-construction activity and design phases for those projects. For the public transit, we just restructured our Vine routes to alphabetical letters and more of a demand-based system rather than a coverage-based system. And we were experiencing very favorable return on investment because our ridership was increasing and we were expecting record ridership at the time. And then of course, the world changed. So, which brings us to fiscal year 21, which I call the post-pandemic year. For the general fund, we actually had more activities because again, we were looking at the Vine Trail, pre-construction and design activities. And so we're receiving revenues for that and actually spending funds for those aspects. Public transit, as you know, took a hit because we had to reduce service because of the low demand due to the pandemic. And so we had to kind of retrench ourselves and rely on the feds with some federal stimulus funding to preserve the essential services for the public transit system. So you can see there from fiscal year 20 to the middle column, we took a dip in terms of public transit revenues as well as expenses. And then in fiscal year 22, which is the year we're talking about, it was a focus on recovery, but not only that, we were again kickstarting our projects in the pipeline as well. So if you notice for the general fund in revenues, fiscal year 21, it was about $7.5 million of revenues received, and it kind of dipped down to about $6 million. And that's because, as I said, for Saskell Junction and the Vine Trail, we were focused on design and pre-construction activities. So we're spending funds on on consultants. And then in fiscal year 22, we had to wait for the final funding package to materialize, as well as getting bids for a construction contractor. And so there was not a whole lot of activity in the fiscal year. That's why you see a dip in the general fund. And for those new board members, we call our general fund also the Congestion Management Agency. That's kind of a legacy name for our agency. We not only do congestion management activities these days, we do a lot more, but that's a label that we've had throughout the years. And so you'll hear us saying the general fund or the CMA synonymously throughout this presentation and any other presentations we may give you. Focus a little bit on public transit. You know, in fiscal year 20, the start of the pandemic, it was relatively, you know, about the same as the previous year, about 11.5, 11.6 million. We took a very big dip down to 10 million. And this year, it seems we're just under 15 million. The reason for that was, one, we executed a new purchase transportation contract, which was significantly higher than the previous contract, just so that we can attract and retain bus operators, which has been a persistent problem for not just us, but for all the Bay Area transit providers. And also, two, fuel costs. You know, fuel costs almost nearly doubled from 824,000 in the what I call the post-pandemic year to about 1.5 million. So that was a huge increase. And we buy fuel at retail prices. You know, that's not something we can avoid. So you've all experienced retail price spikes for your personal vehicles, and we've experienced the same as well for public transit. I also have an element in there called capital revenues and loans, and I have a little asterisk next to loans because the TIFIA loan, our Transit Infrastructure Finance loan for the bus maintenance facility, that's funding we received. That's considered proceeds, but it's not considered revenue because it becomes an obligation because it's a loan. So I wanted to show you up here that, you know, our capital revenues, which was for a MOLA Park and Ride, which was also for zero emission buses. We'll talk about that in the last slide, but it was also, we also received funding proceeds for the bus maintenance facility as well as grants. And so I wanted to give you that overarching prospect of this is money, that funds that we received, not necessarily you see that on the audits. You know, they're in different places, and if you can cobble all that together, then you'll come up with these numbers here too. So in terms of the expense side, it kind of follows what I've been saying about revenues. If revenues increase, costs certainly have increased. I did these 5 elements here. I dissected them into the general fund, public transit, capital, depreciation. And I always call it depreciation separately because it's a non-cash charge. It's a charge against our assets. It's not necessarily we paid somebody for that, but it is considered an operating expense. So I always separate that out to show you how much depreciation is in perspective of the rest of our operations. And then, of course, we had the asset disposal in the current year. And that was for 3 vehicles that we did dispose of that didn't have any value to them. They had a little bit of value, but pretty minor. And also the computer-aided dispatch automatic vehicle locator system that we had to scrap, unfortunately, but we did replace it with a more modern CAD AVL system. But it was a charge against our financial well-being, so against our financial health. And in the lower box below, we have the net position, which is pretty much add in all the elements. And this is the at the end of the day, this is what it looks like. So for the general fund, we've kind of been trending with unrestricted cash flows around between 2 and 2.5 million. So that hasn't really changed, which means that our current revenues were enough to for our current expenses. Now, for the new board members, almost all of our funding is done on a reimbursement basis. So most of our grants are done on a reimbursement basis. We have to front the money. We do get an advance called Transportation Development Act funds. But depending on the type of fund, sometimes we have to give that money back. For the public transit, we have to give that money back for those advances. But for the general fund, we get to keep them and accumulate throughout the years. And that's really for projects we have in the pipeline that, for the most part, requires a local match. So our TDA funds for the general fund is considered a local match for that, as well as for other projects and programs. Public transit, you'll see in the last column, our total net position was about $23.4 million. It took a dip, obviously, in the recession year, and then it spiked way up in the current year. And that's because of the line bus maintenance facility and our zero emission buses. And we'll talk a little bit about that with the last slide. But overall, the position of our agency increased about $12 million. And that's mainly because we added assets, namely the bus maintenance facility, the mobile park and ride, and the zero emission buses that were delivered in the fiscal year. Next slide, please. So for the congestion management agency, the general fund, as in the first slide, you'll see that the revenues came in at just under $6 million and expenses came in a little bit less than that, which means we were able to get enough resources, get enough revenues for our expenses. And you can see in these pie charts where those revenues came from and where the funding went to. So for the revenues, as I said, Transportation Development Act comprises about 40 to 50%. This year comprises a little bit about 50%. Federal sources, which is our OBAG funds, or One Bay Area grant funds that we get from MTC. We do get some federal sources from Caltrans too for the year, and that was primarily for Saskell Junction. Excuse me, sorry, that it's not from Caltrans or Saskell Junction, but our federal sources came for the ATP grant for the Vine Trail, and as well as for the One Bay Area grant. Other government agencies includes the Vine Trail Coalition is kind of in there, and this is where the Caltrans grant comes from. And then local contributions, membership fees, and a little bit of interest comprises the rest of the revenues we received for the year. On the other side of that coin, we have consulting services, the lion's share, 52%, and that's for all our transportation programs and projects that we undertake. And that does include some Vine Trail activity too. Vine Trail is not an NVTA asset, so we have to treat it as a regular expense. And you'll see those expenses and those revenues that we generate come into the general fund as opposed to our capital projects. Next slide, please. So with the general fund, we have two long-term obligations, our pension obligations and our OPEB obligations, or other post-employment benefit obligations. So for our pension funding, we're pretty much at the same level as we were last year, about 75% of total pension funding. Now, ideally, you want to say, why can't we get closer to 100%? And you don't really want to do that because that money that you invest into the pension fund, it's amortized over a 30-year period, and that those current funds can be better used for other projects, for near-term projects, rather than in a fund, which, of course, I think we all know has taken a little bit of a hit this last year, but 75% is actually a very healthy level for an agency for our size. As compared to the rest of the state, it's about 70%, we're doing better than the rest of the state. We're also meeting our pension obligations too. There are no issues with unfunded liability. We always will have an unfunded liability because that's a determination from an analysis, and that's over a 30-year amortization period. But a 75% funding level is actually considered very healthy for an agency such as ours, and there are no red flags or risks involved with that level of funding for our agency. So we're meeting our obligations basically. On the other post-employment benefit side, we adopted a new plan back in 2011. We've been contributing to that funding for the last 10 years or so, 10 years, 11 years actually, 12. And it is 100% funded. We don't draw upon that fund currently. We just allow it to gain interest investment earnings. And of course, it's taken a little bit of a hit this past year. But it's been, before this past year, it's been the compounded growth rate has actually been around 10 to 15%. So it's actually been doing pretty well. Now, of course, this past year, the stock market took a hit and it ate into a little bit of those funds. But currently, we only have 3 active retirees receiving benefits, and those costs are about $12,000 a year. So we're able to use current funds to pay for those, and so we're still allowing for the OPEB fund to increase as much as possible before we start drawing down. We can draw down at any time, but it's staff's recommendation that we just keep paying for the current retirees until we until a level where if there was one more retiree actively receiving funds, then perhaps I think the agency would consider drawing down on the current funding to pay for those expenditures. But right now, it's not necessary. I think staff's recommendation is we just keep the fund, allowing it to grow as much as possible before we start doing drawdowns. Next slide, please. So for the public transit fund, so this is for public transit activities. It doesn't have anything to do with transportation programs. But again, we see operating revenues at just under 15 million, 14.9 million. We also see expenses, and it's at 16 million, just over 16 million. And I put a little asterisk there because it includes the property disposal, about $2 million that we talked about. Now, if I took away that $2 million, it's hovering around 14 million. So pretty much our operating revenues and our operating expenses are really at the same level. It also includes depreciation, as I said, which is a non-cash charge. And if I eliminated the disposal and I eliminated the depreciation, the transit fund will actually experience a little bit of a surplus. And that's mainly because, a little bit of a surplus when I take away those two charges from those two one-time charges from the methodology. Again, accounting wise, we have to treat these as operating expenses. We have to put them somewhere. They fall under expenses. And but I did want to make that disclosure that there are other elements in the expense category that we have to consider. But once you take away those two charges, the public transit fund is experiencing a little bit of a surplus. So again, another healthy fund. Next slide, please. Last slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about capital projects. This just shows where the activity for each of the three projects that are NVTA assets, bus maintenance facility. About $9.2 million was recognized in assets. Mola Park and Ride, just under 2.4. And then we did get delivery of zero emission buses. So that was about $4 million. Next slide, please. And that concludes my report. I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for that report. Do we have any questions from the board members? Any directors with questions or comments? Not seeing any. Do we have any comments or questions from the public? Okay, very good. So as we know, this is an action item. There's actually two parts here. The first is to accept and file the financial statement with the independent auditors report for fiscal years ending June 30, 2022 and 2021. And the NVTA single audit report of the uniform guidance for the year ended June 30, 2022. And then the second item being return and allocation surplus of $163,517 to the local transportation fund, LTF trust fund. If we don't have any questions, do we have a motion and a second?
I'll move both recommendations in the staff report.
I'll
Thank
second.
you. Thank you. We have a motion by Gregory and a second by Shuto. Roll call, please.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Liz Alessio,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Ryan Gregory,
Yes.
Eric Hall,
Yes.
Anna Shuto,
Yes.
and Eric Knight.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. Moving on to 10.2, and this is an action item that Executive Director Kate Miller will present to us. And this is on the termination fee exposure in the power purchase agreement between the seller, 127 Energy LLC, and Napa Valley Transportation Authority. You can find this on pages 169 to 172. Executive Director Miller.
Thank you, Chair Alessio. So in November, the board authorized staff to negotiate with 127 Energy a power purchase agreement, a 20-year power purchase agreement. And this is for a photovoltaic system at the Vine Bus Maintenance Facility. And you authorized at that time an amount not to exceed $450,000. So staff, along with General Counsel Mufti, have been negotiating with 127 Energy to finalize the agreement. The agreement to date benefits NVTA significantly and currently entails nominal costs associated with minor changes that are going to be well below the $450,000 that you authorize. And mostly those are related to changes to the box and the switchgear associated with operating the system and some minor communication cables. Those are going to be absorbed by the maintenance facility budget, and we won't go into this $450,000 that we set aside. 127 Energy is fully funding the canopies and the photovoltaic system. And in exchange, we'll receive all the tax benefits and carbon credits associated with the system. And that's how they generate their revenues. NVTA will benefit by significantly reduced power bill with savings of between $2 and $5 million over the life of the agreement. Someone not on mute.
Director, okay, thank you.
And this is no outlay by us really, or any significant outlay. The actual amount though of what our savings will be is going to be really driven by what happens with power costs over that 20-year period. So this item is requesting the board to approve the clause in the proposed agreement that it's under the default remedies and damages clause, which would require NVTA to pay a termination fee should the system be damaged by a party other than 127 Energy, where the system is rendered incapable of generating electricity and is beyond repair. So table 1 in the memo lays out the specific fee schedule, and it starts at about $5.8 million and is discounted annually to about $1.2 million in year 20. And then it's about market cost beyond that if the system is continuing to operate. So we looked into the cost of insuring the payment. Obviously, the actual physical damage to the facility is covered under our policy, but the actual payment is another thing altogether. So we looked into insuring that risk, and we did find one insurer that showed moderate interest, but the cost would be about $3 million over the life of the 20-year life of the photovoltaic system. And it obviously would pretty much offset any benefits that we're getting, or, close to, but in the neighborhood of. So the risks associated with acts of God and war, which, weather, any sort of damage associated with, terrorism, knock on wood that we don't have that at the maintenance facility. Those are actually covered under another area of the agreement and would not trigger this payment, this termination fee. And so staff thinks that given the sort of relatively low probability of an uninsured catastrophic event damaging the system beyond repair, we think that the risk is sort of warranted to just accept that we are able to deal with that if it comes up. There are going to be challenging to pay certainly the high end of this chart. Laura has shown it up here on the screen. But I think that we should accept the risk given the benefits and not actually seek insurance to cover it. So that's the staff recommendation. It's well beyond my executive director authority. So that's why we're bringing this to you. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Miller. Do we have any questions by our board of directors? I'm not seeing any. Oh, there we go. Director Knight.
Thank you. I just have a question in terms of this termination or the fees or the catastrophic. Does this include potential, the catastrophic earthquake damage?
That would be considered an act of God.
Okay. So in the location, I guess in terms of the location of the facility is reasonably, in Napa County or in the South County area, it's in an area maybe that isn't necessarily like some of our schools have been sitting on earthquake faults. I'm just curious to see, is there any risk at the location of the facility or?
Yeah, but I think earthquake is not something that would trigger this.
Oh, I'm
payment.
sorry.
So that's
Okay.
an act of God. So act of God and act of war are not would not subject the agency to having to pay the termination fee.
Okay, good.
I
Thank
think,
you.
you know, yeah, I think we tried to rack our brains on what the exposure would be. And I think the one thing that I came up with was probably, again, knock on wood, an airplane crashing into it, and an airplane that's not insured. So, so that, because it's close to the airport, it's possible. But you know, a total loss, you have to think about like what kind of impact would create a total loss on this facility. I mean, the canopies are structured in a way to where if we hit the little poles with our buses, you know, it's not going to cause a total loss. It's just, yeah, we really did try hard to come up with what could create such an event.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Knight. Yes, Director Joseph.
And
Vice Chair.
following up on the, you know, rogue airplane pilot. I mean, how many airplanes are not insured? It's not like you can go out and buy a car for a couple $100 and not insure it. Seems to me planes are kind of pricey and, you know, so even that scenario, which is probably unlikely, you know, we have a backup plan. You know, the plane would be covered and we could go after it. So I agree. I think the risk is low. It's always, I don't know, offensive isn't the right word, but it's always kind of annoying to see somebody say, okay, and if something crazy happens, I want $5 million from you. But the reality is, like you said, it'd be pretty hard to come up with a scenario. Even if a person accidentally dropped a wrench and broke a panel.
That's not a total loss. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of like, yeah, you'd have to work at it.
Yeah.
So, all right.
Let's not encourage anybody.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, and Director Garcia, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just more of a, just trying to understand better what a total loss might be to replace. Because I can't imagine anything, bus crashing into it could damage part of the equipment. Okay, then there'll be cost to replace that. Probably support structure or something like that. Or a panel goes bad. What's the life expectancy of the panels? I understand it's usually about 20 years.
So keep in mind, it's total loss to the facility in the sense that if the facility was damaged and it was not covered by insurance, our own insurance, and the board made the decision, the business decision to essentially not repair the facility because the damage was too extensive and walk away, then this termination is going to likely kick in because we are walking away from the system that the seller put their infrastructure, their money investment
generating revenue for them. Yeah.
So in that scenario is highly unlikely where we would just simply walk away from the bus maintenance facility unless maybe it's all the way at the end of the term and it just doesn't make sense to repair the facility with funds. So it's really that unique situation that kicks in, which we think that the risk is unlikely because we're going to need this facility anyway. We're going to need to park buses, charge them and maintain them. So, I mean, where else would we go, right? We would just repair the facility. We're not going to go out and purchase new property and build a whole.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what that event might look like. You know, you see pictures of a tornado impact. Well, we don't live in a part of the country where we have those. Massive fire doesn't seem to be a lot of a wood area around it that would cause a problem for that. So I would agree. It seems like the probability of that happening would, to me, sounds very.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. Any other questions or comments? Not seeing any. Do we have a motion and a second to approve staff recommendation, termination fee exposure in the power purchase agreement between the seller and Napa Valley Transportation Authority?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Vice Chair Joseph.
Second, Gregory.
And second by Gregory. Roll call, please, Laura.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Liz Alessio,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedroza,
Yes.
Ryan Gregory,
Yes.
Eric Hall,
Yes.
Anna Shuto,
Yes.
and Eric Knight.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. We're on to item 10.3, and this is an action item that will need a motion in a second. And this is amending the contract with Kleinfelder for construction services. And Grant, you're going to be presenting this, and we can find this on pages 173 to 180.
Good afternoon again, Chair and Vice Chair and board members. This item is to amend a contract with Kleinfelder Construction Services. The recommendation from staff is for the board to authorize the executive director to execute and make minor modifications to amendment number 1 to agreement 21-20-CM01 for construction management and material testing services with Kleinfelder Construction Services, increasing the contract value by $736,534 for a total not to exceed amount of $1,636,564. A little bit of background on this item. In August of 2021, the board approved 3 contracts for on-call services with Kleinfelder Construction Services, Park Engineering, and Sequoia Ecological Consulting for construction management, materials testing, and biological and archaeological monitoring services. And this was for 3 different projects, including Napa Valley Vine Trail, St. Helena de Calistoga, Vine Transit Maintenance Facility, and the Amola Park and Ride Improvements Project. The total authorized value for those 3 contracts was $1.7 million. However, at the time when staff brought that item for approval to the board, we noted that the total expected cost for those contracts was approximately $3.5 million. And we did note that we would more than likely return to the board requesting additional funding once we had made our way through some of these made our way through construction and we had a better idea of what the full and final cost to deliver construction management and material testing services would be for these contracts. So let's see, the total contract value, or I guess the breakdown in scope and fee. So we're asking for a total of $734,564 in addition to the base contract for Kleinfelder. This is for 2 projects, one of them being the Napa Valley Vine Trail project, and the scope for that project that Kleinfelder is performing that they need additional funding for is materials testing in the total value of $82,000 and change. And then there are 2 scopes associated with the Vine Transit Maintenance Facility, construction management and materials testing for the bus maintenance facility. And the total added value for that scope is approximately $650,000. I'd like to note that this, we are not asking for any additional funding, any new allocation of funding for the Vine maintenance, or excuse me, for the Napa Vine Trail project, the materials testing services. Park Engineering, who's our construction manager, originally had some scope for approximately $95,000 to provide materials testing. That scope has never been used under Parks contract. And so what we're proposing to do is transition or transfer $95,000 worth of funding out of their contract into Kleinfelder's contract to cover the $82,000 shortfall that they're asking to be funded. For the Vine Transit Maintenance Facility, the $650,000 and change will be funded through a previously approved contract, construction contract contingency, which was approved when the construction contract was authorized by the board. That concludes my report. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the board, the directors? Not seeing any public comments? And not seeing any? Okay, very good. Do we have a motion and a second?
I'll move approval.
Thank you.
Recommended action.
Thank you. Director Shuto, do we have a second?
Second, Pedrosa.
Second by Pedrosa. Roll call, please, Laura.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Liz Alessio,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedrosa,
Yes.
Ryan Gregory,
Yes.
Eric Hall,
Yes.
Anna Shuto,
Yes.
and Eric Knight.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. We're on to 10.4 and our agenda only goes to 10.6, so we're almost there. This is an action item, amendment contract with Sequoia Ecological Consulting, Inc. for biological monitoring and archaeological services for the Napa Valley Vine Trail, St. Helena to Calistoga. And Grant, you get to present this again. These are pages 181 to 186.
So thank you. This is a similar item that will amend the contract that was also previously approved by the board. So the recommendation is for the board to authorize the executive director to execute and make minor modifications to amendment number 2 with Sequoia Ecological Consulting Incorporated, agreement number 21-22-CM02 for biological monitoring and archaeological services in an amount not to exceed $53,287, bringing the total contract value for Sequoia to $150,567. So this contract is associated with the Vine Trail St. Helena to Calistoga construction contract as part of our the environmental document that was generated for the project. There were some mitigation, monitoring, and reporting requirements to monitor potential impacts to flora and fauna, as well as make recommendations for tree removals as necessary that may be in conflict with the alignment of the Vine Trail. For the Vine Trail itself, the contract was suspended in August of 2022 due to significant conflicts with PG&E, underground PG&E gas line, or the gas line within the alignment of the project. PG&E directed NVTA and our contractor to pothole or locate their line about every 100 feet. As part of that activity, Sequoia incurred additional expenses that were not originally budgeted for because there's a requirement to provide archaeological monitoring. And so what this amendment is requesting is additional funds to cover the costs incurred by Sequoia that were not originally expected under their base contract. And that concludes my report.
Very good. Thank you for that explanation. Do we have any questions from any of our directors? Not seeing any public comment? Not seeing any. Do we have a motion and a second?
Move approval.
Pedrosa
Second,
approves.
Garcia.
Second by Garcia. Roll call, please, Laura.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Liz Alessio,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedrosa,
Yes.
Ryan Gregory,
Yes.
Eric Hall,
Yes.
Anna Shuto,
Yes.
Eric Knight.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much. We're moving quickly now on to 10.5, again, an action item here. And this is an appointment of 2 NVTA board members and 1 alternate NVTA board member to participate in the county-wide Vision Zero stakeholder working group. And Diana Meehan is going to present this. This is pages 187 to 190.
Good afternoon, Chair Alessio. Happy New Year. Welcome, new members of the board. I'm Diana Meehan, MBTA staff, here to present 10.5. This is an action item. As you know, we contracted with our on-call consultants, Fair and Peers, in November for a countywide Vision Zero plan. The goal of this plan is to improve roadway safety countywide for all modes and to support the requirement under several funding plans to have a local road safety plan in place. One of the tasks in the plan is to assemble a stakeholder working group as well as a technical advisory working group. Today, we will be requesting that the board appoint 2 members for the stakeholder working group. This particular group will be made up of course, board members, elected officials, business members, members of the community, local advocates, where the technical advisory group will be predominantly made up of staff and public safety and public health. These 2 working groups are really essential to the process for the plan. We'll be looking to you to help advise putting together concepts for promoting the policies and the programs within each of the jurisdictions. We expect this stakeholder working group to meet up to 6 times over the course of the process, likely virtually. We want to kick off this first meeting sometime in early February. We would love to have all your faces on the stakeholder working group, but we would be in a Brown Act violation to do so. So today we're asking that you appoint 2 members to the group and 1 alternate member, preferably from each different jurisdictions, again, to avoid the Brown Act violation. And that's what the ask is today. That concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the Vision Zero planning process.
Thank you, Diana. Is there a recommendation to have a representative from Up Valley and then representative from Lower Valley
No,
on
not
this
in
from
particular.
NVTA?
We'll be bringing this back through the board periodically for periodic updates. This is just participation on the stakeholder group.
And knowing how busy everybody is who's already existing on this board, do you happen to know the schedule? What the schedule will be, or is it you're waiting to see? who's
We
appointed?
are looking at, I think the first stakeholder working group we're looking at, I think is February the 8th. Don't quote me on that. We're still, we wanted to meet today first and have you appoint your members. And then we're going to be sending out a poll to find out what works for everyone. I will say that the South County, American Canyon, City of Napa, and the county have all adopted local roadway safety plans, whereas the Upper Valley communities do not have local roadway safety plans. So we will have an additional focus on those Upper Valley communities for that reason.
Thank you. That's helpful. Any questions by any of the directors? Okay, yes, Vice Chair.
Not so much a question, but just to express some interest in serving on that committee. I know that local traffic safety is a big hot item in American Canyon, so it might be helpful to be more knowledgeable about it and hopefully do something positive.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Anybody else? Yes, Dr. Chateau.
I'm interested to represent Up Valley, if that's what you guys.
Happy to make that motion.
Very good. So we have 2 volunteers. We have a raised hand and we have a motion, but we have a raised hand from Director Garcia.
Yes, as I'm understanding it, then the hours of the meeting would be subject to resolving that, probably some sort of a scheduling type of thing. Who's available what days? We can all land on a certain date and time, then we'd be good to go. I think my concern is just conflict with current assignments already for elected.
Thank you, Director Garcia. Yes, yeah, there could be some scheduling conflicts, not knowing the exact time. But we do have volunteers from with Vice Chair and also Director Chateau, and we have a motion. Do we have a second on that motion?
As a point of clarification, do we need to come up with an alternate?
I think it'd be great to have Mayor Sedgley, representing, one of our largest cities in as a mayor. I think that would be a great addition.
You might put me as an alternate, but no can do.
I would be willing to be an alternate
I'd
and
second that.
represent the city of Napa.
I'd
But
second that. I'd
Director
second
Pedrosa,
that.
that was a good try.
That motion reflects the addition of Chair Alessio as alternate.
I second the
great.
motion.
So we have a second. Who's second? Was that second by Garcia?
Yes.
Very good.
Did we
Thank
already have
you.
a second?
All right. So we have a motion and a second, and roll call, please, Laura.
Leon Garcia,
Yes.
Mark Joseph,
Yes.
Liz Alessio,
Yes.
Scott Sedgley,
Yes.
Alfredo Pedrosa,
Yes.
Ryan Gregory,
Yes.
Eric Hall,
Yes.
Anna Chateau,
Yes.
and Eric Knight.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And with gratitude to Vice Chair Mark Joseph and Director Chateau. Moving on to, are we at 10.6? Yes, we are. Okay, this is informational only, and it's a federal and state legislative update from Executive Director Kate Miller.
Great. I'll make this quick. On the federal side, Congress approved the fiscal year 2023 omnibus appropriation bill, which was a $1.7 trillion spending package. And the package includes 12 appropriations bills, including the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development, or otherwise known as the THUD bill. The bill also includes a list of congressionally directed grant program funded projects, which really is an earmark. We're not supposed to say that anymore. And included in that list was a $4 million award to the Vine Trail Coalition for pre-construction of the St. Helena to Yountville segment. So thank you, Congressman Thompson, for that. On December 8th, the Senate confirmed Shailen Bott as the administrator of the Federal Highway Administration. And he will be the first person of Indian descent to lead the FHWA. Bott served as a FHWA associate administrator in the Obama administration. Congress is currently contending with the looming deadline to increase the debt ceiling. Federal spending limits are expected to cap out as soon as tomorrow. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said that they are prepared to pursue extraordinary measures, including shifting money around between federal agencies to ensure that they are meeting their borrowing obligations. That's probably not highly likely, but we're going to see what happens here. House Republicans are expected to use debt limit negotiations to demand cuts in federal spending programs such as Medicare and Medicaid. Since legislation making major reforms to top social assistance programs would likely be nearly impossible to pass through Congress. The Senate could also emerge in the upcoming weeks as a negotiating force if a group of Senate Republicans join with their Democratic colleagues to draft a compromise in raising the debt limit in exchange for certain conditions, such as including measures to decrease the deficit. And while we are all watching this, the stock market is now taking a nosedive. So anyway, and I'm going to move to the state side now, maybe less clownage, more serious business. On January 10th, Governor Newsom unveiled his budget for the 2023-24 fiscal year. Unlike the revenue bonanza from the past 2 years, the governor was forced to make difficult choices to bridge what we thought was going to be a $25 billion shortfall is just a $22.5 billion deficit. The proposed plan appropriates about $300 billion and addresses funding gap through a mix of funding delays, triggers, shifts, and cuts. More concerning is the LAO's belief that there is a 78% chance, I don't know how they came up with that the deficit projected by the governor will grow, and urges the legislature to plan for a larger budget problem. Given the potential for a dour fiscal outlook and the threat of recession, the governor's budget does not dip into any of the rainy day funds, which is currently at $35.6 billion. The spending plan relies on essentially redirecting $18 billion in budget surplus funds that were allocated in the 22-23 spending plan. Maintaining funds in the budget reserve will be critical in the event of a recession. So that is the reason for that. Critical transportation is, I would say how this is going to affect transportation is a reduction in zero emission vehicles and supporting infrastructure, reductions to the transit and intercity rail capital program, which we rely on for replacing buses with zero emission buses, and also cuts to active transportation. And the other kind of grim news is that the revenue generations for state transit assistance, which is generated on tax on diesel and we rely on for operating purposes, is down by about $102 million. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I hate to end the meeting with that such sour news, but
Yeah.
that's reality.
Well, thank you. No, thank you, but thank you, I guess. Or any questions or comments? I see Director Gregory, you have your light on? No? Okay. None? Okay. Thank you very much, Executive Director Miller. We are really close to being on time here. Any future agenda items? Not seeing any. So we can adjourn this meeting and it's 3:37. Our next regular meeting is February 15th, 2023.